In traditional Chinese medicine, there's a plant called Sai, Chinese celery. For more than 2,000 years, it has been prescribed for specific conditions. Not just any celery, not just any preparation. The plant must be gathered at a specific time of year. It must be prepared in a specific way, dried, steeped, decocted at a specific temperature. It must be given by a practitioner who knows the patient's constitution, their history, their pattern of imbalance, and it must be taken with specific foods at specific times of day, often in the presence of others. To the modern scientific eye, all of this looks like superstition wrapped around a plant that may or may not contain active compounds. The ritual is noise. The relationship is noise. The timing is noise. The only thing that matters is the molecule. But in 2024, something shifted. Researchers in China took a compound derived from celery, they call it NBP, and put it into clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease. The number of Alzheimer's clinical trials in China grew from 9 in 2021 to 107 in 2024, a tenfold increase in 3 years. And much of that research is focused on compounds from plants that have been used in traditional Chinese medicine for millennia. Now, here's the question that stops me. If the compound works, and the clinical trials suggest it does, what about the rest of it? What about the ritual context? What about the relationship with the practitioner? The timing of the administration? The meaning embedded in the act of taking medicine? What if the ceremony is not noise? What if the ceremony is part of what makes the medicine work? Let me tell you what this research actually reveals, and why it matters more than you might think. Welcome to Scholars Fire, the show where we sit with one idea long enough to understand it. Not just what it says, but why it matters, who challenged it, and what it means for the very human life you are living right now. I am Sarah, co-founder of the Wired Ape, a platform built around one central observation: that humans are animals with ancient brains navigating a world that changes faster than evolution can follow. Every episode of Scholars Fire explores one idea, one thinker, one piece of research that helps us understand that gap a little better. Today, we are exploring the convergence of traditional Chinese herbal medicine and modern Alzheimer's research, and what it tells us about the relationship between ritual and pharmacology. The story involves a humble plant, Chinese celery, used for 2,000 years in ritual context, now yielding compounds in advanced clinical trials. And it raises a question that sits at the very heart of the Wired Ape thesis. What happens when we strip medicine of its ritual container? And what do we lose when we do? We are living through an unprecedented moment in Alzheimer's research. After decades of failed trials and dashed hopes, there's genuine momentum. New drugs are showing efficacy. New biomarkers, biological markers that indicate the presence of disease, allow detection years before symptoms appear. In Hong Kong, researchers have developed a blood test that detects Alzheimer's with 96% accuracy up to 15 years before the first memory lapses. But the story I want to tell today is not just about science. It is about where that science is coming from. The surge in Alzheimer's research in China is not happening in a vacuum. It's happening in a country with an unbroken tradition of plant-based medicine stretching back more than 2,000 years. And the compounds being tested are often derived from plants that have been used in that tradition for the entire length of its history. Chinese celery, Apium graveolens, is one of those plants. In traditional Chinese medicine, the compounds isolated from celery, NPB among them, are showing real effects on the brain. They appear to protect neurons, reduce inflammation, and improve blood flow in ways that directly address the pathology of Alzheimer's disease. Now, here's where the story gets interesting. The traditional preparation of Chinese celery for medicinal purposes was never just about the plants. It was embedded in a complex ritual context. The practitioner assessed the patient's constitution, their pattern of imbalance. They determined the right timing, seasonal, lunar, sometimes even hourly. They specified the method of preparation, drying, decocting, sometimes fermenting. They often prescribed specific foods to accompany the medicine, and the act of taking the medicine was often communal, witnessed, supported, embedded in relationship. To the modern pharmaceutical paradigm, all of that is irrelevant. The molecule is the medicine. Everything else is packaging. But The question emerging from the convergence of traditional medicine and modern pharmacology is whether that is true. Does the ritual context do something that the molecule alone cannot? Does the relationship with the practitioner activate expectancy mechanism? The placebo effect in the best sense, that enhance the compound's pharmacological action? Does the timing, the preparation method, the meaning embedded in the act of taking medicine change how the body responds? This matters right now because we are at a moment of reckoning with the limits of modern biomedicine. We have extraordinary drugs. We have surgical techniques that would have seemed like magic a century ago. But we also have a crisis of meaning in medicine. Patients feel like numbers. Appointments are rushed. The relationship with a practitioner is often transactional. The ritual of medicine, the ceremony of healing, has been stripped away in the name of efficiency. The traditional Chinese medicine model, with its deep attention to context, relationship, and timing, may have something to teach us, and the fact that compounds derived from that tradition are now showing efficacy in clinical trials gives us an opening to ask the question, what if the ceremony is not noise? What if the ceremony is part of what makes the medicine work? To understand the significance of the celery-derived Alzheimer's research, we have to go back to the traditional Chinese medicine framework in which this plant has been used for millennia. Traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, is not a single system. It is a collection of practices and theories that have evolved over more than 2,000 years. But there are certain core principles that have remained remarkably consistent. One of them is the idea that health is a state of balance between opposing forces called yin and yang, between the body and the environment, between the individual and the community. Disease is understood as imbalance, and treatment is understood as restoring balance. In this framework, no treatment is ever just about the compound. The plant itself has properties: nature, warming or cooling; flavor, sweet, sour, bitter, pungent, salty; and meridian, which organ system it affects. But those properties are not fixed. They interact with the constitution of the patient, the season of the year, the method of preparation, and the intention of the practitioner. Chinese celery, Qin Sai, is classified in TCM as a warming herb. It is used to address conditions associated with cold and damp, including what TCM practitioners described as phlegm clouding the orifices of the head. That phrase in TCM theory refers to cognitive fog, memory loss, and what we would now call dementia. For 2,000 years, Chinese celery has been prescribed for these conditions, but the prescription was never simply take this plant. The prescription included gather the plant in the autumn when its warming properties are strongest, dry it in the shade, not in the sun. Prepare it as a decoction, simmered for a specific length of time. Take it at a specific time of day, often in the morning, when the body's yang energy is rising. Accompany it with specific foods that support its action. And do all of this under the guidance of a practitioner who knows your pattern of imbalance. Now, fast forward to the 21st century. Researchers in China began isolating compounds from Chinese celery. One of those compounds, a molecule called BP, showed remarkable effects in laboratory studies. It appeared to protect neurons from damage, reduce oxidative stress, that is, the cellular damage caused by unstable molecules called free radicals, and improve cerebral blood flow. In animal models of Alzheimer's disease, MBP improved memory and reduced the accumulation of amyloid plaques. The clinical trials followed, and here is where the numbers become striking. In 2021, there were 9 clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease registered in China. By 2024, that number had grown to 107, a tenfold increase in 3 years. And a significant proportion of those trials are investigating compounds derived from traditional Chinese medicine, including MBP and other plant-based compounds. At the same time, researchers in Hong Kong developed a blood test that detects Alzheimer's disease with 96% accuracy, up to 15 years before symptoms appear. The test measures levels of specific proteins in the blood, biomarkers that change years before cognitive decline becomes visible. This means that for the first time, we can identify people who will develop Alzheimer's long before they lose their memories. And that means we can potentially intervene early with compounds like MPP, to slow or prevent the disease. So here's the picture that emerges. A plant used in ritual context for 2,000 years to treat what we now call dementia yields a compound that modern pharmacology validates as effective. A diagnostic test allows early detection, and clinical trials are expanding rapidly to test these compounds in human population. But the question remains is the one that TCM has always asked. Does the compound alone work as well as the compound delivered within its ritual container? The central idea that we are exploring today is that the ritual context of traditional medicine, the timing, the preparation method, the practitioner relationship, the meaning embedded in the act of taking medicine, may activate neurobiological pathways that enhance the pharmacological effects of the compound. In other words, the ceremony is not noise. The ceremony is part of the medicine. Let me walk you through the science behind this idea. There's a growing body of research on what is called contextual factors in treatment outcomes. The term refers to everything about a medical intervention that is not the specific chemical or surgical intervention itself. The relationship with the practitioner, the patient's expectation of benefit, the meaning the patient attaches to the treatment, the ritual of administration, the setting, the timing, the sensory experience of taking medicine. For decades, these factors were dismissed as placebo effects, the implication being that they are not real effects, just psychological illusions. But the neuroscience of the last 20 years has completely overturned that view. Placebo effects are real. They are mediated by specific neurobiological pathways. They involve the release of endorphins, the body's natural painkillers, dopamine, and other neurotransmitters. They can change heart rate, blood pressure, immune function, and even the activity of genes. A 2021 study from Harvard Medical School looked at the neural mechanisms of placebo effects in Parkinson's disease. Patients who received a placebo, a sugar pill that they believed to be active medication, showed measurable increases in dopamine release in the striatum. The expectation of benefit was sufficient to trigger the release of the very neurotransmitter that is deficient in Parkinson's disease. Now, here is the critical point. The placebo effect is not an alternative to real treatment. It is a neurobiological pathway that can be activated alongside real treatment. And the question is, what activates it? The answer is meaning. The patient's belief that they are receiving effective treatment conveyed through the ritual of medicine activates these pathways. In traditional Chinese medicine, the ritual of medicine is elaborate. The practitioner takes a detailed history. They palpate the pulse, not just the rate, but the quality, the depth, the rhythm. They examine the tongue, its color, its coating, its moisture. They diagnose a pattern of imbalance that is unique to the patient. They explain the treatment in terms that make sense within the patient's worldview. They prepare the medicine with care and intention, and they often administer it in the presence of others, the family, the community. All of these elements are, from the perspective of modern neuroscience, potential activators of expectancy mechanisms. They convey meaning. They signal care. They communicate that something important is being done. Now, add this to the pharmacological compound. MBP, derived from celery, appears to have genuine neuroprotective effects. It crosses the blood-brain barrier, the protective layer that separates the bloodstream from the brain, and acts on multiple pathways relevant to Alzheimer's pathology. It reduces oxidative stress. It improves cerebral blood flow. It may even promote the growth of new neurons. The question is, does the compound work better when it is delivered within the ritual context that it has been surrounded in for 2,000 years? Is the compound alone less effective than the compound plus the ceremony? There's a concept in pharmacology called therapeutic context. It refers to the fact that the same drug can have different effects depending on how it is delivered. A 2018 study on postoperative pain found that patients who received morphine from a clinician who was warm, communicative, and attentive required significantly lower doses to achieve the same pain relief as patients who received morphine from a clinician who was cold and impersonal. The same drug, different contexts, different outcomes. Now, we do not yet have studies that directly compare MPP delivered in a traditional Chinese medicine context versus NBP delivered as a standardized pill in a clinical trial. But the question is being asked, and it is being asked because the dramatic growth in Alzheimer's research in China is forcing researchers to confront the gap between the traditional knowledge that identified these plants and the modern framework that is now validating them. There is another layer to this that is worth exploring. Traditional Chinese medicine does not separate the plant from its context. The plant is understood to have properties: warming, cooling, moistening, drying, that interact with the patient's constitution and the environment. The same plant, prepared differently, taken at a different time, combined with different foods, can have different effects. This is not superstition. It is a sophisticated model of context-dependent pharmacology that modern science is only beginning to explore. For example, research on bioavailability, the proportion of a drug that enters the circulation and reaches its target, has shown that food can dramatically affect how much of a compound is absorbed. A 2022 study found that taking curcumin, the active compound in turmeric, with black pepper increased its bioavailability by 2,000%. Traditional Indian medicine had been combining turmeric with black pepper for thousands of years. The ritual was not arbitrary. It was pharmacology embedded in practice. Similarly, the timing of administration can affect outcomes. Many traditional medicine systems prescribe herbs at specific times of day, in specific seasons, aligned with lunar cycles. Modern chronopharmacology, the study of how drug effects vary with timing, has shown that the efficacy of many drugs depends on when they are taken, because the body's biological rhythms affect drugs' metabolism and target sensitivity. So, how does this idea about ritual context and pharmacological effect apply to the Wired Ape thesis? How does it eliminate the evolutionary mismatch between our Stone Age brains and the modern world? The mismatch I want to focus on is the separation of medicine from meaning that characterizes modern healthcare. Our ancestors did not separate the treatment from the ritual. The healer was also the ritual practitioner. The medicine was administered within a ceremony that conveyed meaning, signaled care, and activated the patient's expectancy pathways. The compound and the container were one thing. Modern biomedicine, in its quest for objectivity, stripped away the container. It insisted that the only thing that mattered was the molecule. The relationship with the practitioner was reduced to a transaction. The ritual of administration was replaced by a prescription and a trip to the pharmacy. The meaning was drained out of the act of healing. And here is the problem. Our Stone Age brains evolved in a world where healing was always embedded in relationship and ritual. The brain's expectancy pathways, the mechanisms that generate placebo effects, evolved to respond to meaning. When a trusted healer administered a treatment within a ritual context, the brain released its own healing compounds, endorphins, dopamine, oxytocin, that enhanced the effects of whatever pharmacological compounds were present. In the modern world, we have extraordinary molecules, but we have largely lost the ability to deliver them within the context that activate the brain's own healing systems. We have the compound without the ceremony. And I think there's evidence that this costs us. There is a cross-cultural example here that I find deeply instructive. In many indigenous healing traditions, the preparation of medicine is itself a ritual. The healer gathers the plants at a specific time, often with prayers or offerings. The preparation is done with intention, often in a ceremonial space. The administration is accompanied by song, by touch, by the presence of the community. The patient's expectation of benefit is maximized. Now, imagine a pharmaceutical company taking the active compound from that plant and putting it into a standardized pill. The pill will have the same molecule, but will it have the same effect? The research on therapeutic context suggests the answer is no. The molecule is not the whole medicine. The meaning matters. This has profound implications for how we think about healthcare. If the ritual container enhances the pharmacological effect, then the most effective treatment is not the compounds alone. It is the compound delivered within a container of meaning, relationship, and intentionality. And that means that the most cost-effective intervention might not be a new drug. It might be restoring the ritual of medicine. Here's a practical application. Whether you're taking a pharmaceutical drug or an herbal preparation, you can intentionally create a ritual container for it. You can take it at the same time each day, in a quiet space. You can pause before taking it, bring your attention to the act, set an intention. You can thank the plant or the people who made it possible. You could take it in the presence of someone you trust. This is not magic. It's neuroscience. The brain's expectancy pathways respond to meaning. When you take a moment to bring attention and intention to the act of taking medicine, you are activating these pathways. You're telling your brain something important is happening, and your brain responds by releasing the compounds that enhance healing. The research on therapeutic context suggests that this practice, this simple ritual, can increase the efficacy of whatever medicine you're taking. The compound works, but the ceremony can make it work better. Now, there is a legitimate challenge to the interpretation I have been presenting. Some biomedical researchers argue that focusing on ritual context is a distraction, that it risks legitimizing unscientific practices and undermines the rigor of evidence-based medicine. The strongest version of this argument comes from researchers who study drug development. They point out that the placebo effect is real, but it is also limited. It cannot shrink tumors. It cannot reverse neurodegeneration. The only thing that can do that is a molecule that actually acts on the disease process. And focusing on ritual context, they argue, is a way of avoiding the hard work of developing better drugs. The challenge then is this. If NBP works, why does it matter whether it is delivered with ritual or not? The molecule works. That's what matters. Everything else is window dressing. This is a fair challenge, and it deserves a serious response. My response is that the molecule does not exist in a vacuum. It is always delivered within a context. And the research on therapeutic context shows that the same molecule can have different effects depending on how it is delivered. If we ignore the context, we are not practicing better science. We are ignoring a variable that affects outcomes. Moreover, the traditional Chinese medicine framework suggests that the ritual context is not separate from the pharmacology. The timing of administration affects the compound's metabolism. The combination of specific food affects its bioavailability. The relationship with the practitioner affects adherence, whether the patient actually takes the medicine as prescribed. The meaning embedded in the act of taking medicine affects the patient's neurobiology. To separate the compound from its context is not scientific rigor. It is a form of reductionism that ignores the complexity of how humans actually respond to treatment. Where I land on this is that the convergence of traditional medicine and modern pharmacology offers an opportunity to integrate the best of both worlds. We have the tools to isolate active compounds and test their efficacy in rigorous clinical trials. And we have the wisdom of traditions that have understood for millennia that the container matters. The task is not to choose between them, it is to integrate them. Every Scholar's Fire episode ends with the same question. What would this thinker or this idea ask us to do differently? If we took this seriously, not just intellectually, but in the way we actually live, what would change? For me, taking this research seriously means changing how I take medicine. It means recognizing that the act of taking a pill is not just a chemical transaction. It is a ritual, and I can make that ritual more or less effective by how I do it. Here's what that looks like for me. When I take medicine, whether it's a prescription drug or an herbal tincture, I try to take it with intention. I pause. I bring my attention to the act. I hold the pill or the bottle in my hands. I take a breath. I set an intention. This is for my health. This is part of taking care of myself. I take it. And then I thank whatever made it possible. The plant, the researchers, the practitioners, the people who support me. It sounds simple. It sounds almost silly. But the neuroscience suggests it matters. The brain's expectancy pathways respond to meaning. When I bring intention to the act, I am activating those pathways. I am telling my brain something important is happening, and my brain responds. The Scholar's Fire question for this week is, what would change in your relationship with your own body if you treated the act of taking medicine, even as something as simple as a vitamin or an herbal tea, as a ritual? What if you brought intention to it, attention to it, meaning to it? The question to carry into the rest of your week is, what is one practice in your life, one act of self-care, one routine that you have been doing mechanically that you could transform into a ritual by bringing intention and attention to it? That is Scholar's Fire for this week. The research we explored today was the convergence of traditional Chinese herbal medicine and modern Alzheimer's research. The story of Chinese celery, used for 2,000 years in ritual contexts, now yielding compounds in advanced clinical trials. And the idea at the center of everything we discussed is that the ritual container of traditional medicine, the timing, the preparation, the relationship, the meaning, may be more than window dressing. It may be part of what makes the medicine work. Follow The Wired Ape on Instagram, YouTube, X, and Threads at The Wired Ape. And if today's episode made one idea feel more alive than it did an hour ago, tell someone, share it. The fire only stays lit if we keep passing it. I am Sarah. This is The Scholar's Fire. This is The Wired Ape.